Hi, and welcome to the 2021 Pint of Science, coming to you live from Stavanger, Norway. My name is Alexander Rotkopf. I'm a physicist at the University of Stavanger, and I'll be your host for this evening. Thanks for tuning in. And please excuse the inconvenience with the YouTube link. So, the Pint of Science team in Stavanger is really excited because we're joining the Pint of Science family for the first time this year, now together with our friends in Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim, Tromsø, and on Svalbard. And we've put together a really nice program for you, and we hope that you will enjoy it. So Pint of Science happens not just in Norway, but it's actually a global phenomenon, starting from humble beginnings in 2014 with around 200 events in 6 countries, growing rapidly to a whopping 2,886 events in 24 countries in 2019, just before the pandemic. And Pint of Science is made possible through volunteers on the ground, and a big thank you goes out to all our volunteers here at Pint of Science Norway for their efforts over the past months. So this year we come to you live and online. In the coming years, in the future where there will be no pandemic raging, we will be able to go back to the original format of Pint of Science, where you can actually meet scientists from your region in a relaxed atmosphere, in a pub or a cafe, and interact with them face to face. But this year we are online, and we'll dive right into our Wednesday program now, where the sun don't shine. We have 3 great speakers from the University of Stavanger with us. Here to my left, Jutta, Eva, and Alex. And if you have any questions or comments during their presentations, make sure to leave them in the live chat window next to this YouTube video. And make sure to stay on the stream until the end, because we will be sitting down with our speakers after the talks have finished and get back to your questions and comments in a dedicated Q&A session. So let's start with our first speaker, Jutta. She will tell us about the Dark Ages in Rogaland. And Jutta is an associate professor here at the University of Stavanger, and she's working at the Archaeological Museum. Jutta obtained her PhD in 2001 from the University of Tübingen in geology, and has worked with several renowned archaeology labs in Germany and the United Kingdom, for example, the University College of London, before joining UIS in 2017. And recently, Jutta was awarded with a prestigious fellow position at the Norwegian Academy of Sciences and Letters. And we are really excited to hear from you on the Dark Ages in Rogaland. Please, Jutta, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander, for the warm welcome. I'm really honored to be the opening act of this year's Pint of Science in Stavanger, because I hope I can live up to that. But the Dark Ages in Rogaland. Imagine, it's the early spring of the year 536, and something is absolutely not okay. The skies are clouded by yellow mist, and the sun has no power. It looks more like the moon in the night. And the thick mists, they persist. They persist for 18 months. And crop failures, famines, and diseases are the consequences. Today, I want to talk about what happened in this special year in history and how it affected the life in Rogaland and how we know about this.
Sorry.
Those of you who don't know where Rogaland actually is, Rogaland lies there in the southwest of Norway. Stavanger, where we are now here, is its capital. Rogaland had already been settled for a very long time in the year 536, but we do not have any written sources from 1,500 years ago from that area. But from other parts of the world we have. The Roman historian Procopius was with the Roman Emperor Justinian on Sicily when he reported this here. For the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear, nor such as it is accustomed to shed. That is what Procopius wrote in the year 536. So literally, the sun didn't shine, and it was not a local event. The Gaelic Irish Annals recorded a failure of bread for the years 536 to 539, which means massive famines. Low temperatures and snow were recorded in August in China, and dense dry fogs in Europe and the Middle East. There are also various other examples for weather anomalies around that time. The written sources show that this was an event that affected actually the whole northern hemisphere, if not the whole world. But the written sources can only tell us that something happened. They can't tell us what happened. That leads us to the question, what caused the Dark Ages? That was probably not that off switch. Historians, of course, knew about this Dark Age. It's nothing new to them. But the reasons for it were a matter of speculation. Basically, for us scientists, two kinds of events can have such a worldwide effects if we see apart from human action, like atomic bombs or something like that. One of this is the impact of a big asteroid. You know that one of those is held responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs. And the others are massive volcanic eruptions. Both kinds of events were discussed for the year 536, and both events can emit vast amounts of dust into the upper layers of the atmosphere, where it is distributed and then over the whole planet and extinguishes the sunlight. And then it keeps on circling around a couple of years before it finally settles again. And of course, traces of this dust can be found in archives. The archives I talk about are not those with historic sources on dusty paper or parchment. I talk about natural archives. Natural archives record environmental and human history in various ways. And a very special archive are the thick glaciers of our planet, which are about to disappear. Glaciers capture the atmospheric chemistry trapped in the snow that fell on it and transformed to ice. And they form these, they form these layers. They're very much like tree rings. So every layer in this ice is a year of snowfall. And in this ice, there are proxies. They can derive proxies for temperatures, movements of air masses, atmospheric deposition of pollutants, and so on and so forth. In the best cases, these ice cores display annual or even sub-annual resolutions. And of course, the year 536 or thereabout was very much looked at, and recent analysis found some volcanic ash around the year 536, which could be provenance to an Icelandic volcano. So probably around that year, or in that year, a huge volcano outbreak, eruption on Iceland took place, and maybe, in addition, on some other parts of the world as well. So if it goes really tits up, it goes tits up. Now back to Rogaland. We have no written sources, we have no ice cores, but we have yet another kind of archive, and that is the archaeological sources. And what are those? And here I have to quote one of popular culture's heroes of archaeology, Indiana Jones: "Archaeology is search for fact." And I might add, not for fantasy. In archaeology, we deal with the material remains of human behavior. This might be wonderful objects forged in precious metal, stone tools, graves, traces of post holes in the ground or waste pits, but also cereal grains, bones, charcoal, many more. In fact, everything that is retrievable can provide us with information about the past. In Rogaland, we find very many traces of settlements and houses. These are often represented by the remnants of post holes in the ground. which allowed to reconstruct the whole layout of the houses. Archaeological structures, post holes or otherwise, are dated by radiocarbon dating of charred remains found in connection with them. This is very important that we have a proper dating because we're dealing with a quite narrow time frame, so we have to have good control of the chronology. And if we look at the Rogaland white phenomenon, we have to look at Rogaland. Here, this is Rogaland, a map, 2 maps of Rogaland. And this is from the master thesis of Morten Wetterhuis, who wrote this in 2017, about the changes in the archaeological material at the transition from the older to the younger Iron Age, which is actually the time we're interested in. So the map on the left shows the sites from the migration period, which dates from 400 to 550 AD. Yellow and red areas indicate areas with great find density. The map on the right shows the same area, but for the Merovingian period, dating from 550 to 800 AD. It is very obvious that between these 2 time slices, something happened. The finds of the migration period are much more frequent and more dense, though the time span actually is shorter than the Merovingian period. So what has happened here? In the migration period, the one with the denser finds, settlements expanded from the areas with good soil. That is where all the red stuff is down there. It's the area of Jæren, where we today have good soils, still have good soils. And from there, it spread mostly eastward into the mountainous regions, and with less good soils and less good conditions. People lived in very big houses, and there are known very many rich graves, and very with costly artifacts, which speak of a quite high standard and wealth. Just a short excursion, literally. This is the Iron Age farm on Ullandhaug in Stavanger. It's quite near here, actually, where we are. And this is a typical example for a migration farm. It has a very long, big house, and another one, big house, and a small house. So this is basically the migration period equivalent for a millionaire's villa or something. But now back to Rogaland. The Merovingian period, the picture looks different. There are less finds, and the finds are mostly concentrated around Jæren, where the favorable soil conditions are. The graves are poorer than in the migration period before. So now we have the difficulty that we can state this, but we cannot positively link these changes in settlement and find density to the dust veil event. Most of the time, arguing in archaeology is about what is probable. Of course, this picture is not new, and before anybody even knew about 536, there were plausible explanations for this. For example, the reduction of farms was attributed to a change in inheritance law, or to the concentration of productive means in power centers. Mind that despite the catastrophe, these explanations might still apply, so they might not be wrong. But I will show you something else. I will now introduce you to the site of Forsand. Forsand is it lies down there at the entrance of the Lysefjord, quite near here, and it's a site where 248 complete house layouts were excavated from 1980 until recently. This is the excavation plan. It's just showing you how vast it is and how many house layouts there are. The main excavator was Trond Løkken, who published this vast and very thorough report on the excavations in this year or last year. Most of the houses are dated, as I said before, by radiocarbon dates from the post holes. And what I show you now needs a bit of explanation, because I made a quick and dirty analysis of the house sizes and the radiocarbon dates. I know that Trond Løkken would probably cringe, but I did it just the same. So, first, I made 5 classes. house classes, ranging from very small to very big. So quite easy. It's, of course, debatable if you could do it otherwise, but I just made it like this. And then I'm sorry. And from every house, I chose one representative date, radiocarbon date. And I made a group calibration of these dates, which is this. What you basically see here is which house size occur when. And this depicts very nicely what I have told you before. In the Bronze Age, I have not talked about yet, but in the Bronze Age, where we start here in Forsand, there are very small and small houses, which means people lived on small farms. The animals were probably left outside. And then in the early Iron Age, a variety of houses occur. That means the farm is getting more complex and is getting bigger. You had several buildings, like the actual house, the stables, the granaries, the sheds. And this reflects two things. One is the expansion and richness of the migration period. The farms become more complex, bigger, maybe the animals were stabled, and probably there were also the need for space for unfree laborers. So the absolutely very, very big houses occur at the end of the migration period. And then the most important thing here is then nothing, or almost nothing. None of these very big houses survived into the Merovingian period. The settlement of Forsand, which had been there for almost 2,000 years, it just disappeared. The settlement ceased, and then ceased totally in the midst of the 6th century, but in the end there were some very small houses, maybe some people just scraping by. Of course, this is only one example, but Forsand is by far the largest settlement in Rogaland, and it would be interesting to see whether this picture can be confirmed by other multi-phase sites in Rogaland as well. But we have yet another source, which is directly connected to actual arable farming, and that are these very thick soil layers. These soil layers are actually artifacts themselves. They arose under what we call plugin-type cultivation, which basically functions like this. Topsoil and is collected from unproductive areas in the outfield and brought into the stables, where it is mixed with dung. And then this mixture is brought out onto the field to enhance the fertility of the soil. People used actually everything that you can think of to enhance the fertility, such as mold, turf, heather sodden, peat, fish intestines, organic waste, and seaweed, very effective, and mineral soil. So over the centuries, these very large, very thick soil layers developed, which we today call anthrosols. And very many of these thick layers are documented during excavations carried out by our museum. And of course, they are dated by radiocarbon dates. So as you can imagine, the dating has many insecurities, as you might date some Bronze Age material which actually ended somehow in a Viking Age soil. And therefore, we always try to find cereal grains, because cereal grains are directly linked to farming, and they represent only one growing season. So, and I made another group calibration, because I really very much love them. And what you see here now is basically kind of a proxy for agricultural activity. You see that you have a massive rise in the agricultural activity in the early Iron Age, when when the farm's getting more complex, and that is also when this plug-in cultivation starts. So you have more complex farms, you have the more complex land use strategy. And it's also the phase where the farms expand into the less fertile areas, because now you have the technique where you can grow something in the outskirts. And then, around, I marked this 536 with a red streak again. It suddenly stops again. And it might not have stopped altogether, but we have no recordings from that. We have activity first starting again in the Viking Age then. The evidence from Forsand and the evidence from the anthrosols both point in the same direction. Something severe happened at the transition from the early to the late Iron Age, which led to a major abandonment of fields and farms. The abandonment of farms could well be explained by a shift in the power structure or something, or by centralization, and former farmers becoming then unfree. But the abandonment of fields can only be explained by a major shortage of workforce or harsh climatic conditions, or maybe both. And the dust veil event of 536 is a very good candidate for this. I'm coming now to the end. The event of the year 536 stays a bit enigmatic still, but it hit a complex farming system here at the very fringe where farming actually is possible. So it was it's a quite vulnerable system to severe changes. And so we do not really know what people experience and what they did to cope with it. My colleague Sarah Westling is about to finish her PhD thesis about the so-called crisis. And she tries to find out why some sites actually succeeded and did not vanish. It's work in progress, and then, of course, I cannot anticipate her results, but it's possible that a shift to less demanding crops played a major role in it. In the end, I like to stress that, although it's now almost 1,500 years ago, people suffered, starved, and died. The immediate result of the dust veil were failing crops for several years in a row. The Justinian plague could afterwards spread through the whole of Europe because people were already weakened by famine. And the Swedish archaeologist Bo Gräslund thinks that the events of the year 536 were thereafter remembered as the Fimbulwinter that precedes Ragnarök in the Norse mythology. I wonder if and how the recent crisis will be remembered in the future. And with that, I will thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jutta, for this really interesting presentation. We will be switching microphones at this point to our second speaker, Eva Pyrihova. Eva is a postdoctoral research fellow here at the University of Stavanger, and she received her PhD in parasitology from Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. Eva is currently working on a prestigious project collaborating with laboratories at the University of Cambridge and the University of Kent, and we are really looking forward to her talk on mitochondrial evolution there and back again. And it's your turn, please.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction. So, as you heard, today I am going to talk about mitochondrial evolution and about mitochondria in general and why it is important to breathe oxygen and also why it is important to study parasites. So, at first I would like to take you 1.5 billion years ago, where our world was mostly inhabited by bacteria, and from these sediments we can say that some of the bacteria were photosynthetic. It means that they were producing oxygen, and the oxygen levels were rising in the environment. So the bacteria had to deal with this new condition. And during that period, something very extraordinary happened. And so there was a bacterial cell with its own DNA, and this cell swallowed another bacterial cell also with its own DNA. But this cell, the prey, wasn't digested and eaten. The prey stayed inside the host cell, and it was enslaved to serve its new host. And it was probably because it helped the new host to cope with the oxygen levels. And this was a crucial event for our evolution, and therefore we would like to study it, but it's very difficult because it happened such a long time ago. So we can only assume that the first endosymbiont, that's how we call the first bacterial cell inside another cell, we think it might have looked like something like that, so like a normal bacteria as we know them today. The only thing which we can study is what we have available now, which is 1.5 billion years later. And if we have a look at normal cell, let's say from human, we will see that during this very long evolution, the bacteria was changed a lot, and it turned into what we now call mitochondria, or sometimes it's called the powerhouse of the cell. And that's because mitochondria is responsible for energy production. And that's the reason you have to breathe oxygen, because without oxygen, your mitochondria wouldn't work and you wouldn't produce as much energy as you produce now. And I'm sure you have this experience, because when you go running and you're out of breath, you can feel it in your muscles. So your mitochondria are out of oxygen, and the cells, they have to turn into another energy production style, let's say, and that's fermentation. So you can feel the pain in your muscles, and that's the fermentation end product. So if you wanted to live without mitochondria, this would be your everyday lunch. So basically you would have to eat 18 times more than you normally eat. So my first take-home message is that every single cell in your body contains small bacteria that keep you alive. So every cell contains mitochondria, which is of bacterial origin, and actually it still keeps its own bacterial DNA. And as I said, this was something which was very crucial for the evolution of all higher organisms. And this is something which we called tree of life. And in the middle there is a common ancestor of all of us. And I'm sure you know the gray lineage. So that's one of the lineage which evolved from the common ancestor, and that contains animals, humans, and fungi. And also the green lineage, which contains all the plants. And I would like to show you what we mostly study in our research. So we mainly use mice, also zebrafish, yeasts, fruit flies, and also human cell lines. And then there is another model organism, which is Arabidopsis, and it's a plant model organism. So you see that the research is very much human-oriented, so we are mostly interested in ourselves and also in our crops. But you see that it doesn't really represent the huge diversity on this planet. So what are these other big lineages of organisms? And people usually call those protists, which is very general, and it means that they are single-celled. So there is one big lineage, the black one, which is formed from different amoebas, mostly free-living. And then there is another big clade, which is orange, and these are ciliates, single-celled organisms, but also multicellular seawater kelps. The blue lineage is basically formed of single-celled plankton organisms. And the last one is it also contains single-celled organisms, mostly free-living, but also many pathogens. So when we talk about these other lineages, I have to say that the mostly studied species from other lineages are the ones which cause some harm to humans, and these are parasites. And when I say that I study parasites, people think it's weird, because they usually think about worms or about something very disgusting. And they also think that we don't have to bother with parasites anymore because we live in Europe and we got rid of them. And we can't really see them around. But there are many ways how to look at parasitic lifestyle, and also many definitions. And this is the one I like the most, which is that parasite is someone who takes our resources without our permission. And if you Google the word parasite, you actually get this. This is a famous Korean movie, Oscar-winning movie, and it's about this guy who lives in the basement of this rich lady, and he steals her food. So this is parasite as well. A parasite can be a cuckoo which lays eggs in other birds' nests. I'm sure you know this one, so we actually make Christmas decoration out of 3 parasites. And everyone in Norway knows mosquitoes, so they don't really harm us, but still they take a little bit of our blood. And while they suck, they can transmit other parasites, such as this one, which is Plasmodium, causing malaria and killing 1 million people a year. And the truth is that for every host organism there is a specific parasite, And if I take an example of human, the parasite can be found in your head, in your brain, eyes, mouth, lungs, skin, blood. So almost every tissue can serve as an environment for a parasite. And this can be applied to every other organism on this planet. And it basically means that there is at least the same number of parasitic species as host organisms. And it's not only about the same number of species, but also the number of individuals. So maybe that's one of the reasons we should be interested in parasites, because they are everywhere. And I'm sure that if you look around and if you catch a mouse or a bird, you will find at least one parasite, even without using microscope. And if we go back to my tree of life, I would like to show you where we can find parasites on this tree. And we can find them everywhere. So it's a very common lifestyle. So basically in every lineage you will find at least one species which is parasitic. I was mostly interested in intestinal parasites. So here comes the part of my talk where the sun doesn't shine. And if you think about living in the intestine, so living in your own gut, it's kind of perfect environment because it's full of bacteria, and that's where your digestion takes part. So it's full of nutrients. So you just have to stay there and you suck the nutrients. But there is always a negative side, and it is the lack of oxygen. So I was mostly studying the unicellular organisms, which are parasites of humans. One of the first one is Giardia, Entamoeba, and Cryptosporidium, and they all cause diarrhea of humans. And actually Giardia and Cryptosporidium, they have occasional outbreaks even here in Norway. And if we have a look at our tree, we can see that these species are completely unrelated. So their relationship is the same as I am related to a potato. So basically they have nothing in common. What they have in common is their environment, so there is the same selective pressure. And they all live in anoxic environment. And of course, people were looking for mitochondria of those organisms, because in evolution you don't keep organelles if you don't need them. So why would you keep and maintain mitochondria if you live in the environment without oxygen? And people were looking for this, so for mitochondria as they knew them from humans or yeasts, and they couldn't find them. So they thought, okay, these organisms, they just lost mitochondria, because it makes perfect sense. But about 20 years ago, papers started to be published from different species. So the first one was Entamoeba, where very small vesicles were found, and they claimed it's a mitochondrial remnant. Then they found it in Giardia as well, and Cryptosporidium as well. So they all contain a little mitochondrial remnant, which doesn't produce any energy. So it seems that it's not that easy to lose an organelle. And if you see the comparison here, you see that mitochondrial remnants are like 10 times smaller. So there is no wonder why it took so long to discover them. And if we look at functions, because mitochondria doesn't just produce energy, it has many different functions, and it doesn't really matter which functions those are, but it's quite complex. And if we look at mitochondrial remnant, there is only single function retained there. And it means that if you want to study mitochondria, you have to deal with this situation where you have many metabolites going in, many metabolites going out, and it's extremely complex and difficult to get into it. But if you choose as a model organism some parasite with mitochondrial remnant, you deal with this situation. So basically the parasite simplified their metabolic pathways to a very simple version. So sometimes it's just easier for researchers to start with parasite and then to apply their knowledge to human research, let's say. And also, what is interesting that we usually look at evolution as it creates something more and more complex, like chimpanzees evolved to humans, or single cells evolved into multicellular organisms, but it doesn't have to be like that. So my last take-home message is that evolution doesn't always lead to greater complexity. And I would like to thank my colleagues here in Stavanger, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eva, for this really interesting talk. We will be switching microphones once more to our last speaker. We are looking forward to Alex Nielsen's talk on black holes. Alex is an award-winning associate professor here at the University of Stavanger. After working in New Zealand, in South Korea, and through a prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship at the Albert Einstein Institute in Germany, Alex joined us here at UIS in 2019. And he's a world expert on the physics of black holes and gravitational waves. And so we are really looking forward to his talk on black holes. Please, Alex.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, Einstein presented his theory of general relativity. It was a scientific revelation. Up until that point, the predominant physical theory had been that of Newton, who we see here on the left. Newton had told us that the thing that makes apples fall down from a tree is the same thing that makes the moon orbit around the Earth, a force he called gravity. Now, Newton's idea, Newton's gravity, is over 300 years old now. Newton has been dead for a very long time. But the tree that inspired, the apple tree that inspired his theory, is still alive in a garden in England. And you see that down on the right. Nowadays, most of us take gravity for granted, although there is a community of people active on the internet who deny that gravity exists. For them, they are not able to accept the idea that the same laws of physics hold up in the sky as hold here down on the Earth. But in Einstein's gravity, things work very differently to Newton's. Einstein showed that gravity is fundamentally linked to space and time. One of the features of beautiful ideas is that they link together things that you wouldn't otherwise connect. For Einstein, space and time have to be joined together. Any attempt to separate them is doomed to failure. They must be joined together in a thing we call space-time. And for Einstein, gravity is the bending of this space-time. Now, this gravity and space and time theory of Einstein's, it doesn't really affect how long it is, how far it is to the supermarket, or how long you have to wait in the queue when you get to the supermarket. But it does predict that the center of the Earth is 2.5 years younger than the surface of the Earth. The center of the Earth is younger than the surface of the Earth because gravity is weaker at the center of the Earth than it is on the surface of the Earth. Gravity also affects how the GPS system works, how my phone figures out where I am. In order for my phone to figure out where I am, it has to receive signals from satellites that are in orbit around the Earth. On those satellites are atomic clocks that keep very accurate track of what time it is on the satellites. But in order for my phone to figure out where I am, it needs to account for the fact that the gravity that the satellites are feeling is different from the gravity that I am feeling on the surface of the Earth in order to accurately determine where it is. It's a very weak effect, but it is strong enough to affect the accuracy of GPS. But if you want to see really strong effects of gravity, really strong effects of bending of space-time, you have to go to black holes. So what is a black hole? A black hole is an object whose gravity is so strong that not even light can escape. Einstein didn't really believe in black holes. For him, they were too strange. He even wrote a paper saying that his theory didn't allow for black holes. But the thing is, once you write down a theory mathematically, it takes on a life of its own. And this formula here, this is the formula that describes Einstein's theory of gravity. I like to call it the most important formula in the universe because it is the formula that describes how the universe evolves on the largest scales. And this formula that describes Einstein's theory predicts the existence of black holes. It doesn't matter whether Einstein thought they were a prediction of his theory or not, the mathematics of his theory does predict them. So black holes are a mathematical prediction of Einstein's theory. But do they really exist in our universe? Well, nowadays we have lots of evidence that in fact, yes, they do exist in our universe. From radio telescopes whose effective size is the diameter of the Earth, to infrared telescopes that can see through dust to the center of the galaxy, to gravitational waves, and to X-ray telescopes that we put in space. We have lots of evidence of black holes now. In fact, we have discovered about 300 black holes now in our universe, some of which I myself helped to discover. But we haven't discovered all the black holes in the universe. We actually believe that there should be around 100 million black holes in the Milky Way. Fortunately, there aren't any black holes in the solar system. These black holes don't pose any threat to us. Now, you might hear sometimes people saying that black holes are very simple objects, that they are only governed by two parameters, their mass and their angular momentum. This is called the no-hair theorem, and people say that black holes don't have hair. They're very simple, bald objects that don't have any properties other than just their mass and their angular momentum. This isn't quite true. In fact, one of the first papers that I ever wrote was of an explicit example of a situation where this is not true. And all the information that we have about black holes in our universe, the observations that we make, actually come from the fact that this isn't quite true. But it is almost true. In fact, it is true to say that black holes are very simple objects compared to other astrophysical objects like stars and planets and galaxies and lumps of rock. So black holes exist, but so what? Well, when I stand here at Pint of Science and I'm surrounded by colleagues who work on things like curing diseases and understanding the interaction between human activities and the natural world, I am deeply humbled by this, and I'm forced to ask myself, why do I study black holes? Why do I study these objects that are billions of kilometers away, whose effects here on Earth are so tiny that we need to build giant machines just to measure them? Well, the main reason why I study black holes is because I think they're interesting. There is a curious thing about black holes. All that strong gravity actually means that Einstein's theory of gravity must break down for black holes. This result is partly due to a theorem that was proved by Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2020. Here is a picture of him with his Nobel Prize medal. And Roger Penrose's theory doesn't really tell us how Einstein's theory is going to break down or where it breaks down, but it does guarantee that it will break down somewhere. It guarantees that there will be new physics with black holes. And new physics is enough for physicists. Physicists love to find new physics. They love to see the limits of the known physics and go beyond that and find new things. But what about ordinary people? Ordinary people who don't know the most advanced theories of physics, the ordinary people for whom all physics is new physics. Well, despite being over 100 years old now, and despite Einstein not believing in black holes, and despite Einstein having absolutely no conception of the technology that we use today to observe black holes and test his theory, his mathematical theory provides an excellent, remarkably good description of the objects that we see with all our telescopes, from gravitational waves to X-rays to radio waves. Einstein would probably say the reason why his theory works so well is because it's so simple. But I don't really believe in the simplicity of the universe. To me, it is deeply troubling that this theory that is over 100 years old, that was conceived so long ago in a completely different environment, still works to describe everything in our universe. And I don't know whether Einstein was lucky or whether he had tapped into some deeper message in the universe, that on some level the universe is actually very simple. And in order to answer this question of whether there is a deep simplicity to the universe, we have to keep testing Einstein's theory in new regimes and in new places to see if we can find a violation. Now, to give you an idea of the work that I actually do, this is a paper that I put out with some colleagues last week. In this paper, we actually show for the first time that one can measure a spectra from an actual black hole. Like atoms and molecules, black holes have spectra. Unlike atoms, they don't emit any light, but they do emit gravitational waves, and they emit these gravitational waves at different frequencies. And you can go out and measure those frequencies, and that is what we did in this paper. And you can use those measurements to test the properties of the black hole, in particular, the property that says black holes should be very simple objects. So we're very excited about this work. So far, the frequencies that we have measured happen to lie exactly where Einstein's mathematical theory predicted they would be. But there is another thing about black holes, and that is they might actually be able to solve two of the biggest problems facing humanity. One, how to generate energy to fuel our civilization, and two, what to do with all the waste and rubbish that we produce. It actually turns out that due to an idea of this man here, Stephen Hawking, that black holes can actually act as sources of energy if you pour in rubbish, for example. If you pour the rubbish in a certain way, the black hole will convert it in the most efficient way possible into energy, usable energy, that we can use to power our planet. So 3 kilograms of my own household waste would produce in this way as much energy as all of the hydroelectric dams in Norway, and the energy produced by just my street in Stavanger would produce enough energy to fuel the entire planet. So it is possible that in the future we will all have black holes that we use to generate power. Now, this isn't going to happen tomorrow. This isn't technology that is being developed right now. In fact, it probably won't even happen for the next 100 years. But in principle, it is possible. And we wouldn't have known that it was possible unless people like Stephen Hawking were motivated to study black holes just because they think they are interesting. I am supremely lucky to be able to study black holes just because I think they are interesting. We all are. But it is possible that in 50 or 100 years' time, society no longer thinks that these things are interesting to study, and we move to some different state. That is a little bit of a somber thought. I don't want to leave you with a somber thought. What I want to leave you with is this joke, right? This is meant to be now a joke. Why black holes are like IKEA. So first of all, they are easy to get into, but they are difficult to get out of. Anybody who's ever been to IKEA knows that is true. There are more of them than you might think, but they are far away and they are not really dangerous. There are over 400 IKEA stores around the world, and that's just here on planet Earth. All of them look the same, more or less. All the IKEA stores are blue, they have big yellow letters on them. All of the black holes are the same, except they have different masses and different angular momentum. And there is something that a lot of people are very interested in finding in them. We don't know quite what it is, or we don't quite know where it is, but we know it's in there somewhere. Even my wife doesn't know what it is, but we are going to continue looking for it for hours and hours and hours. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this really great talk. We are now at the end of our 3 talks for this evening, but stay with us. We will have a short break. Stay on this channel, and we will sit down with all of our speakers and get back to the questions and comments that you left for us in the live chat window. So stay tuned, and we will see you in a bit. And we're back again now with sound. And we are in the question and answer session. And we're here with our three speakers from the 2021 Pint of Science Wednesday program, Where the Sun Don't Shine. And we are really excited that you brought questions and comments here through the YouTube chat for us. And we'll dive right in. And the first question that we got was from our very own Mark. Hi, Mark, over there. Mark was asking whether somehow such events that Jutta talked about, these such kind of volcanic eruptions that made the sun vanish, whether that could have sparked somehow the beginning of a new era, like the Viking era. Is this something that could be connected in some way?
Well, you asked me that before.
Yes, indeed, I did.
Now I can change my answer, but no, I'm not really sure, because I'm not an archaeologist in the classical way, so I don't know so very much about the material culture. And if you want to answer that, you have to see whether there are traits which are leading from there to the material culture to the Viking Age or something like that. And what are the Vikings? It's what we define. It's not that people wake up one day and say, wow, we are now Vikings. It's the Viking Age. So so you always look at it backwards and say, okay, we define that the Viking Age starts here because it was, I don't know, this farm battle or something like that. Don't know what.
And maybe another aspect was that if living on land seems to appear to be quite unreliable, because from one day to the other the sun switches off and your crops fail, would you think that this might have driven people more out to sea than it was before?
I don't think so, because already in the Bronze Age boats were really important. You see the rock art here where you have many boats depicted, so you know that boats were important. And it's of course it's really understandable. If you live near the coast, many people still have boats today here, so boats are important.
An integral part of the lifestyle here. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Cool, thank you. I myself also had a question, and this was related to the house sizes actually that you showed us. And you showed us these huge houses that immediately somehow went out of existence in this graph after 536. But then the smaller houses still somehow stayed on for a little bit longer. And I naively would have thought that a bigger farm with more diverse jobs to be had could sustain itself better than like a small tiny farm with fewer people. Is this a train of thought that is not correct? How should I think about this?
Well, yeah, I think about it like this. I mean, if you have a big farm and you have to maintain it, then you need a lot of workforce. But when you have a few years of crop failure and most of the people have died, it's probably not so easy, for example, to heat this house. It's quite big, and if you go to the Iron Age farm and you have to heat this house up, it takes quite a lot of energy. Okay. So and it's probably easier than to live in a small house and to just have a small plot, if any, or go fishing.
Yeah.
Just don't grow anything anymore on your farm.
Yeah, this luckily for us in the 21st century living in Norway, unfortunately the resources are there, and we don't have to worry about these kind of things. Good. Then we have one question for Eva, and the one question I see here is: does it still happen that cells eat each other as a way for evolution to somehow progress? Is this something that still happens, or was this somehow a singular event in history that made us what we are?
Yeah. So the mitochondria, where the first endosymbiosis of mitochondria, it happened only once. But there are other cases of endosymbiosis, such as plastic evolution. So there are like different types of plastic which serve for photosynthetic functions, so for plants. So these are in green organisms. but it's happening even nowadays. So you can see, I think there is some kind of, I think it's some kind of sea slug, I don't know, and it can consume a little algae, so it turns green.
Yes.
And it uses the energy from the algae, which lives, I'm not sure whether it's inside of the cells or if it's inside of this tissue, but it's happening even now.
So it's gaining this ability to do photosynthesis
Yes.
by consuming other living cells and then incorporating it in its own. Wow, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Cool. Thanks. We have another question from Unhi Jo. If black holes look the same, then do they all weigh the same? And how does the weight depend on the size? Is this something we can easily understand?
Yep. So black holes look the same up to having different masses and different angular momentum. So there are big black holes, there are very big black holes,
Okay.
and there are smaller black holes. And they have different masses because of the size. So the size correlates almost directly with the mass.
Okay. And if you throw in a bit more garbage from your neighborhood, the black hole
would get a little bit bigger, and then it would emit that energy again as through this Hawking effect, and that would be useful energy that one could use.
Cool. Sounds good. Yes, sure.
Where does it go, the matter we put in there?
Where does it go? Nobody knows. So this is part of the mystery of black holes, that nobody actually knows what happens inside when things go inside.
When we dump all of our garbage in our mini black hole every day, would not the Earth lose material then? Massively?
You would lose the rubbish that you're trying to get rid of, whatever it is that you're trying to get rid of. The black hole would convert that energy, that material, into useful energy that you could use.
Yeah, but then it means that the Earth loses material.
Yes.
Yep.
You've got the rubbish
Yes.
with
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's
Yes.
not too
So
good.
it's not really recycling,
No,
but
not
it's
really.
turning rubbish that you really want to get rid of, which could be toxic waste, it could be nuclear waste, of really nasty stuff you don't want to recycle into something, into useful energy that you could then use. And it is incredibly efficient with black holes, the most efficient way of turning rubbish into energy.
And what kind of radiation is that comes out? Is that microwave radiation? Is it?
It depends on what size of black hole you use.
Okay.
If you want to have a very small black hole that sits on your tabletop,
Okay.
it's going to be very high energy radiation that comes out.
Okay.
If you want to have a bigger black hole that maybe you put in orbit around the moon or something, then it will be maybe microwaves or something lower.
I would go for the microwave one. I think that would be. If next time I'm at IKEA, I'll be looking for the microwave black hole. And there's the follow-up question that he asks: does this mean we can feed and raise a black hole? I mean, if you had a tiny black hole and you
have a
feed
black
it,
hole, you can feed matter into it and make it get bigger. Yes.
okay, and but at the same time it's radiating off, so it stays hungry. So you have to keep feeding it that it doesn't go away.
Yep.
Okay.
And we see black holes out there in the universe where there is matter falling into them, and that is one of the ways that we see the black holes out in the universe. Is falling into them.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Why are they not dangerous? I mean, if they just suck matter into themselves, so they. At some point-
So an uncontrolled black hole here on Earth would be dangerous. The black holes that we know about in the universe, they're all a long way away, billions of kilometers away. So we're not in danger of being sucked into any of these black holes that we see.
Okay.
And we have another question from Thibaut Freid. He's asking, what kind of technology would one have to develop to actually extract that energy from the black hole? Because that, I think, is the key.
Yes. So first of all, you would need a black hole. And that's probably the most important ingredient that we don't currently have. And then you would need a black hole of the right size. So you would need some way of making to order a black hole of a certain size. If you took, for example, the black hole that's at the center of our Milky Way is far too big, and it wouldn't really work. You need a much smaller black hole than the black holes that we see out there in the universe. So you need to find a way of making these black holes of the sort of mass of a mountain. And then, of course, you need some way of keeping the black hole safe so that it doesn't end up destroying things here on Earth. So you need to put it into orbit somewhere or out in space somewhere. And then what you need to do is you need some way of extracting this energy that it's emitting and turning it into useful energy that we could use on Earth. So if you wanted to do what regular power stations do, thermal power stations, take energy out of something that you're burning and heat up some steam and turn it into electricity, you would have to be able to control carefully the temperature of the black hole. And then also, if you wanted to use it as a waste dump, to literally turn waste into energy, you would need to find a way of feeding the energy into the black hole in a way that, first of all, didn't stop this process of how you're trying to extract it, but also fed it in such a way that it was getting in where it needed to go. Okay.
If you don't feed it, will it then stop emitting radiation?
No, it will keep on emitting radiation until it disappears.
Okay.
That's actually a good thing.
That's the theory.
Black holes get rid of themselves in some sense.
Yeah.
So I wonder where the material goes.
Into radiation.
Yeah, but... Okay.
Do
Yeah,
you
maybe.
know what's
Yeah,
on
maybe.
the other side? So it sucks, and then
Nobody knows what's on the other side. Einstein's theory gives a prediction, and the prediction, which is what Roger Penrose won the Nobel Prize for, is that eventually Einstein's theory stops working.
Okay.
So it basically predicts its own limitations of what it can predict.
And Mark just sent a follow-up question. If feeding a black hole makes it bigger, can that lead to a runaway? Somehow it growing too rapidly, and it will just blow us out of our existence when we have it nicely sitting on our table.
You could certainly do a lot of damage with an
Yeah.
uncontrolled black hole.
Imagine.
And that's one of the technologies that would need to be developed, is to how to do this safely. Yes.
Good. And we are so good at developing things to do to think
Well,
safely.
as I say, it's not technology that people are working on at the moment, and it's probably not going to happen in the next 100 years, but in principle it's possible.
Cool. And picking up the topic of converting waste into energy, that brings me to Eva again. You told us that these anaerobic organisms got somehow rid of their mitochondria, but only almost got rid of them. Is there something that they are really needed for, or is this just a fun thing to have such a mitochondrial remnant in your cell?
no, I don't think it exists in evolution that you would keep something just for fun.
Okay,
Because you
yeah.
have to compete, right? So you can't
true.
maintain an organelle just for fun. So there is one function which is connected to iron metabolism, which is for some reason very difficult to get rid of. You know, it's very difficult to reorganize and get rid of mitochondria. But a couple of years ago, they found a free-living protist, which is, it seems to be without mitochondria. And so it basically stole this pathway from bacteria. So it stole some genes, it placed it in the cytosol, and then it could get rid of mitochondria.
Huh. So it is possible to maybe acquire some of the functionality from somewhere else,
Yes.
and then shed the complex mitochondria.
Yes.
Okay.
It's happening all the time.
And so you said that this was connected with the environment that's lacking oxygen. Are there other things that these cells now incorporated that help them in that environment, or do you just need to get rid of things coming from an environment with oxygen into an environment without oxygen?
No, because there is always like a background level of oxygen. So there is a little bit of oxygen even in our gut. So they have to have some mechanism how to deal with it, because it's toxic for them. So if I maintain my cell cultures, I have to keep them anaerobic. And if I am not cautious enough and I make bubbles or something, they die.
So
So-
actually now that's during my civil service as a military substitute service, I was actually working in a biology lab, and I was allowed to do a bit of cell culture myself as a lay person at that time. How do you do cell culture without oxygen? Do you have special environments that are flooded with inert gases to do these kind of cell culture
Yeah, you
activities?
can have a special box which is filled in, I don't know, nitrogen. So
Okay.
just stick gloves into it and
I
you
agree.
work inside. But my cultures are not that serious, so they can tolerate a little bit of oxygen. So I keep
Okay.
them in anaerobic jars, but when I maintain them, I can open them normally.
Okay.
But then I have to quickly put them back in anaerobic environment.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. We have another question by Tobro Works. It's a question on the evolution and the complexity argument. The question is, while evolution does not imply increasing complexity that we heard, then it does not seem to be the case that. So does it not seem to be the case that more complex organisms have developed more recently? So somehow you make the point that evolution is not necessarily always going towards more and more complex structures, but somehow most of the more complex organisms we see around us seem to have been developed more recently. So there's a tendency for complexity, apparently. Is that something
Yes.
what we can say?
I actually I don't know, but I think so.
Yes.
But
Okay.
even it was, I think maybe it was too simple. But even parasites are they are not very simple. They have like very complex mechanisms how to escape the immune system, for example. So in this aspect they are very complex, but in the other aspects, for example, feeding and metabolism, because for them nutrition is very accessible, right? They don't have to go and hunt for food. So in this way they are simplified, but in the other ways they are much more complex.
Okay.
So it always goes both directions.
And everything that is living on this world right now had the same time to evolve, essentially. So even the single cell organisms that are here had the same time on this planet to react to their environmental stimuli and adapt.
But
Many
a
more
different speed.
generations.
Yeah, and more generations than
And the speed is different because it depends on the evolutionary pressure. So if you're under pressure, you have to evolve faster.
And as scientists, we know that we have to evolve fast since we are often under pressure. Very good. I see at the moment no further questions from the audience. But I have another question for you, Jutta. You showed us some soil samples and some photograph of soil. What kind of technology is involved? Is it taking a spade and digging in? Do you?
Do you mean how we make the profiles, or how the?
Well, in documentaries, I see people with drills going in, and how does this?
I mean, no. This is normally we have a digger normally.
Okay.
So we, what we normally do when we excavate these sites, for example, where this profile was from, we just strip the topsoil, and then you have the natural, and then you see for example, the post holes or the contacts or structures are deep down into the natural normally. And you cannot, of course, we do this in certain steps, so not all in one thing, so not all in one go, because then you would lose a lot of material. And then you have these soil profiles at the what do you call it? The fringe or of the excavation, and you can easily.
Okay.
And you can also, of course, we normally dig them with a digger, and then we clean them with a trowel.
Cool. Thank you. There's one more question, again by user TobroWorks. Is there any knowledge, I think this goes to Eva, is there any knowledge about the complexity of parasites far back in the past, like at the times of the dinosaurs? Do we have any remnants from that time? Because it's fossilized, it might be difficult.
I don't think so, because they're usually soft. They don't have any bones.
Yes.
Maybe eggs. I'm sure there were eggs. I saw some pictures where they excavated Richard IV from England, some of the kings, and they found his bones, and also a lot of it was some kind of tapeworm. So
yes.
the eggs they can, but I don't think they could be preserved from
the dinosaurs. No. Okay. Yes, it's
but
soft
maybe,
matter.
Yeah, other civilizations, it's possible.
Okay. Cool. There is a user Miyu Hana who just wanted to let us know that IKEA has already evolved. You can use the lift to get back upstairs, and there are several shortcuts straight to the exits, and maybe black holes. Maybe that that goes both ways. That black holes will evolve to the IKEA model. Well. That would mean that one would have to change the equations that Einstein wrote down in order to change the black hole, because you told us the black hole is something that comes out of these equations, and that's how it comes out.
Yep, that's right.
So let's see whether
IKEA is evolving faster than black holes,
and it's still less dangerous. It's still less dangerous.
I'm not sure.
Very nice. So thanks everyone for this really great Q&A session. Thank you out there for staying with us to the end. Thanks for the great questions. We enjoyed having you with us here, and make sure to tune in tomorrow, 7:30, the second installment of the 2021 Pint of Science live from Stavanger, Norway, and it will be Dog Eat Dog. See you tomorrow.